Mizuto is an ugly loser who broke up with a baddie because she got too freaky for him. However, when their parents get married, she becomes his stepsister. So they rekindle their love and secretly start playing stuck in the washing machine when their parents aren't home. This story starts with Mizuto and Yumi having a brutal stare-down, but when their mom, Yuni, shows up, they quickly act like loving siblings to avoid raising any suspicion. Later, Yumi heads to Mizuto's room to go over the plan to keep their parents from learning that they used to get freaky in the sheets. However, when Yumi demands that he starts calling her Oni-chan to make it believable, Mizuto refuses. At this, she suggests a game to determine the older sibling and explains that any time one of them loses control of their inner demons, they lose. As soon as he accepts, she starts going through his books and he immediately gets worried because she is inches away from his limited edition Gunnar comics. The next moment, he starts apologizing for everything he has ever done, and this causes her to remember the version of him she fell in love with. This, unfortunately, causes her to act out of character. So he takes the first win and pats her on the head as she struggles to deal with failing miserably at her own game. Days later, they both end up enrolling in the same school. So they put on the loving siblings act for their parents, and wait until they get inside before deciding to never walk to school together. Shortly after this, they get to class and Mizuto's hatred for school skyrockets when he learns that Ume became the class rep because she managed to get better grades than him in the entrance exams. To make matters worse, two random losers suddenly show up and act like they are interested in him, only to ask for a way to approach Yume. When he finally gets back home in the evening, Yume asks why he didn't do anything about them because they obviously think he is a pushover, but he tells her not to worry about it. The following morning, the same guys try to stop him on the way to class, so she grabs his arm and tells them not to interrupt their conversation. This surprises Mizuto, but as soon as they get inside, she returns to her usual hateful self, so he decides not to say anything else about it. After school, she tells him that their parents won't be back at the usual time, so he quickly whips up something for dinner. While eating, she finally asks if he didn't notice her melon squeezing into his arm in the morning, and when he says he already forgot about it, she rushes into the bath to hide her frustration. Minutes later, she walks out with nothing but a towel to get his reaction. And for the first time, he breaks character, so she sits right in front of him to make it worse. However, what initially starts as an innocent plan to tease him takes a turn when the towel starts opening up. The next moment, Mizuto starts walking over to her, so she closes her eyes, expecting to get pounded into the couch. But he throws his hoodie over her and tells her not to do something so out of character in school as she wants to preserve her reputation. He also thanks her for the help earlier, so she gets up to leave but trips over the hoodie and crashes into him. This time he forgets how to resist and leans in to get a kiss, but their parents suddenly walk in, so he makes her hide in the couch. At school the next day, another shameless creep tries to get close to Mizuto, but this time he quickly shuts it down. However, Curry claims that he is actually not interested in Yuma, but this only causes Mizuto's suspicions to increase. Shortly after this, the girls start getting their measurements for P class, but Ume gets held back by another chick named Minami, who has been feasting her eyes on the largest pair of melons she has ever witnessed. After Ume brings her back to reality, she apologizes and asks how they got so big. So Yumi tells her not to give up hope because she was also flatter than a smooth wall just a year ago. For some reason, Minami accepts that implants had nothing to do with it. So they head out for the physical assessment. After Minami aces the first test, Yumi realizes that having monster melons isn't always a good thing. But after seeing that Mizuto isn't even trying to pass the assessment, she decides to push herself to the absolute limit just to preserve her current reputation. Luckily, this helps her avoid getting a bad score. But after hours of forcing her body to endure hell, she suddenly loses brain power and falls into Mizo's arms. He then tells her to stop doing too much and throws her into Minami, who then wonders why he is even out here since boys finished their assessment over an hour ago. Shortly after this, Yumi wakes up in the infirmary, and after thanking Minami for staying with her, she explains how she spent the last few days working herself to the max just to maintain the baddie persona she started with. Upon hearing this, Minami admits to thinking that she was actually a top-level hottie, and expresses how excited she is to now see that she's just a nerd who had a glow-up. In class the next day, she gets shocked when Mizuto explains that suddenly caught a fever and had to stay home for the day. As soon as she decides to come over after school, Kairi asks to come with, so she immediately shuts down his obvious plot to see a baddie in her most vulnerable state. Hours later, she follows Mizuto to shop for groceries before they get back to the house and check on Ume. Just then, she spots Mizuto through the delirious effects of the fever and thinks time has rewound to when they were in love. But as she tries to ask for cuddles, he introduces Minami to snap her back to reality. Moments later, he joins Minami in the kitchen to whip up some soup. And when she starts flooding him with relationship questions, he carefully steers away from the topic to avoid exposing their most valuable secret. Soon after this, she feeds Ume and finally leaves. So he heads back up to check on her and ends up fighting demons when she places his arm on her melons and tells him to watch while she sleeps. This causes him to reminisce about the relationship and how badly it ended before their parents suddenly decided to give them the perfect excuse to play stuck in the dryer. 90. After his trip down memory lane, she wakes up and turns him into her personal assistant for the rest of the day. But when he starts trying to check her temperature again, she tries to talk him out of it. Moments later, he learns that she kept acting sick to get extra attention. But as he starts scolding her, she hides under the blanket and still begs him to stay, so he decides to stick around since they are technically siblings. Yumim thinks back to the times Mizuto would always get her some sort of gift while they were dating, and how she practically turned into a creepy voodoo specialist in an effort to preserve their love. The next moment, she pulls his special shorts in for a heavy sniff and realizes how creepy she still is. So she panics over how he will react if he finds out. After fantasizing about the freaky punishments he might give her, she decides to wait until midnight to return it to his room. Hours later, she finally decides to make a move. But as soon as she gets to his room, he walks out with a fresh pair of melon wraps he likely used for an intense goon session. They both immediately head to the living room for a meeting. And after Yumi loses in rock, paper, scissors, he demands an explanation first to honor their stupid step-sibling rules. She decides to come clean and claims that she found it in the dryer and couldn't return it because her mom suddenly showed up. After Mizuto claims the exact same thing happened to him, they decide to give each other one command to use at any time, but Mizuto also adds a rule allowing them to do whatever they want outside school. The following afternoon, gets the shock of a lifetime when she spots him on what appears to be a date with a random chick wearing their uniform. The very next day, she describes the girl to Minami in hopes of figuring out who she is, but Minami claims to have no idea. Later on, she gets back home and almost flips out when she sees an obviously female pair of shoes inside the house. The fact that it took him at least 6 months to invite her over triggers the insecurity she spent eons trying to fix. So she calls him and uses her command to send him grocery shopping so she can ambush his side piece and explain how evil he is. However, after hearing the door, she tries to enter his room and bumps into him. This surprises him, so she decides to straight up ask about the girl he has over, but he acts oblivious and asks if she has mental issues. She then asks about the date instead, and after he tells her to mind her business, she brings up the shoes only to see that they are no longer at the entrance. This time, Mizuto asks if she noticed anything different about the house. And when she asks what he is talking about, he decides to take a look by himself and notices that someone was at the dinner table. Later that night, Yumi fires up her brain to understand what happened while Mizuto thinks back to when the black-haired chick suddenly asked to become his wife. Thanks to the trauma he endured while dating, he was already used to four-eyed psychos, so he calmly asked if she even knew him. After taking off the disguise, Minami explained that she wanted to marry him so she would become Yumi's sister, because what happened during the assessment test made her realize how perfect their family would be. She then started stalking him around in the costume to force him into accepting the proposal. After recalling everything, Mizuto calls Carrie and asks about Minami, so he explains how obsessive she can be when she wants something. He goes on to describe how she sent her first boyfriend to the ER after a couple months of literally draining his life force like a freaky vampire. Minutes later, Mizuto makes up his mind and decides to use his command by asking Yumim out on a date outside an aquarium. The following day, Yumim thinks back to when he suddenly asked for the date and wonders what diabolical scheme he is cooking up. The next moment, he shows up dressed like the mafia daddy she always dreams of, so she takes a moment to control her floodgates from gushing out. Minutes later, they join a coup to get tickets, and while she continues fighting to hide her obvious obsession with him, Curry quietly stalks them both with Minami. Earlier that day, he told Mizuto to use the date as the perfect opportunity to stop Minami's psychotic obsession by making her believe that they are both in love. While they both continue stalking the lovebirds, Kazuto finally gets tickets, so they both head inside to enjoy watching the fishes. But Mizuto quickly gets worried about how far he might have to go just to convince Minami that they are both living the sweet Alabama life. Brother, to make matters worse, the tip Curry gave him about compliments starts ringing in his head, so he takes a moment to get into character before saying that she looks a lot cuter than usual. To his greatest shock, she responds with a soft thank you instead of the usual back talk. And while he tries to figure out what is going on in her head, KG continues convincing Minami that they look like the perfect couple. Minutes later, starts talking about some of the fish to break the tension. But then Mizuto suddenly pulled her in for a hug and claims she was about to bump into someone despite feeling her heart about to beat out of her chest. Ume remains calm and asks if he plans to hold her there all day. So he lets go and starts thinking of another way to make her break character. Minutes later, he rushes into the bathroom to ask Carrie for help. But after saying that he didn't notice anything awkward about their date so far, Carrie tells him to trust his gut a little more. As Mizuto then decides to get his act together, Yumame realizes that she is lost and starts beating herself up over it because she has a habit of acting without using her microscopic brain cells. After the usual self-hatred affirmation, she gets a call from Mizuto and prepares herself for a couple minutes of roasting, but he calmly apologizes for leaving her to wander alone and promises to come find her. However, she gets shocked by this and says he shouldn't be this nice before hanging up the phone. Over half a year ago, they ran into each other at the school library and quickly became friends, but Ami wanted a lot more from the first handsome nerd she had ever laid eyes on, so she eventually mustered the courage to ask him out. Once they started dating, she asked to go to a fireworks festival with him, only to get lost when she eventually got there. Within a matter of minutes, she got emotional and was worried that he would see her as a burden. So she called him to apologize and kept bawling her eyes out the entire time. Luckily, he eventually found her and bought a can of soda in case she was thirsty. After reminiscing about how he promises to always come find her, she hears his voice and raises her head to see the exact same can of soda from that night. Shortly after this, they both start arguing over the most basic stuff, and this causes Minami to finally accept that she will never have a shot at becoming Yume's sister-in-law. While she starts changing her plans, Mizuto and Ume continue their date at the jellyfish section. But things suddenly take a dark turn when she starts focusing on the shredded corpses of tiny fishes being fed to the transparent demons. Mizuto quickly taps into his dark side to match her freak and ends up going overboard with a theory about how the fish food might be people who got ambushed in the river. Soon after this, Ume decides to head home before him to keep their Alabama love story secret. And as soon as she leaves, Kari shoots Mizuto a text before Minami shows up and apologizes for breaking into their house. After she promises to stop obsessing over Ume, Mizuto also promises not to tell her about it since they have become very good friends. Despite this, she still promises to keep trying to marry him so she can build an even better relationship with Yume. Meanwhile, Little Miss Clueless gets settled at home and still tries to figure out the truth behind the pair of loafers she found the other day and the mystery girl Mizuto went out with. When he finally comes back, she decides to use her command and spends the following hour forcing him to sit through a photo shoot so she can gather enough material for an intense goon session. Upon seeing how excited she is, Mizuto decides to entertain one last request. So she asks for a special hug from the back and a sweet whisper to seal the moment. He initially asks why she's going that far, so she claims it's just her way of punishing him. While praying, he says yes. Moments later, she gets prepped up on the couch and waits until he hugs her before grabbing his arm to enjoy the moment. At school the next day, he and Carrie keep a close eye on both of them to make sure Minami is actually over her psychosis. He then asks Kure if he has ever been admitted to the hospital. So Carrie admits that he was the unlucky boyfriend who got drained to the point where he couldn't move a muscle. Later that week, suddenly asks Mizuto to help her shop for a Mother's Day gift, but he refuses and asks why she can't just get it by herself. She then claims that doing it together will make their parents believe they still get along as siblings before also adding that she needs him to split the bill with her. He immediately says no again, and for once she decides not to make a big deal out of it. Instead, she quickly changes into a dress that causes Mizuto's brain to glitch out. As soon as she notices the delirious starring, she reminds him of the rules and commands him to go shopping with her since he just broke them. Shortly after this, they get on the train together and Mizuto wastes no time in complaining about how packed it is. Just then the train wobbles, so he leans closer to hold the door and immediately apologizes. However, when he tries to back up, she tells him to stay since the train will likely keep shaking until they get to the stop. Later on, they finally get to the store and spend most of the day searching for a good gift, before finally returning home with a bouquet of flowers that causes their mom to get emotional. After she runs off to tell their dad about it, Mizuto heads over to the prayer room to pay respects to his mom. So Yume decides to offer him support. Afterwards, he suggests giving their parents some time alone so they can actually enjoy being a married couple. You may initially get shocked that his lab-grown brain could ever think of something so sweet. But she also agrees to it and asks if he has any ideas after saying that they are both too poor to afford sending their parents on a trip or holiday. He says they will have to spend the night elsewhere instead. Upon hearing this, loses it and asks if he has just been plotting to spend a night alone with her, but he immediately acts like the idea disgusts him. She then reminds him that they actually can't get a hotel on their own, but he admits to having found a special hotel that would allow it, before saying that it's only a last resort if they don't find a better option. While having breakfast the following day, he shows her texts with Carrie, who just agreed to let him stay over and also said could stay with Minami since they live right next to each other. That Saturday, they both show up for the sleepover, and Minami quickly takes the chance to thank Mizuto for getting her a night alone with Yume. After Curry tells her to focus on Yuma, they all head inside, but she goes out of her way to warn Curry about even thinking about coming over. Moments later, Yume asks about their relationship. And as she starts claiming that he is nothing but an acquaintance she has to put up with, he says the exact same thing to Mizo before asking how far he has gone with Yuma. This confuses Mizuto at first, so Curry takes it a step further and asks if she has ever gotten stuck in the dryer. Upon realizing what he is asking about, Mizuto refuses to give him any detail about their relationship. So Carrie decides to tease him and yells that he wants to keep Ume's melons all for himself. Just then, Yumi starts slamming on the wall. So Minami pulls him back, but she still sends Mizuto a text calling him a creep. As Curie starts laughing about it, Mizuto decides to get his revenge and ties him up before pulling a special diary entry and loudly reading out his wish to get strong and become Minami's overpowered husband. After Minami also freaks out, they all end up at the same restaurant. So the lovebirds continue cussing each other out while Mizuto and Ume wonder if they always act like this. Minutes later, Yum spots Mizuto trying to understand the drink machine, so she tells him to stand back and watch before proceeding to make a death potion. Back at the table afterwards, Minami and Curie explain how to actually use it and tease them for being so introverted to the point where their brains can't handle general knowledge. Minutes later, Minam suddenly grabs Mizuto's arm and asks for private lessons to make Ume jealous, but he tells her to ask Ume instead. Ume then thanks him for accepting that she is way smarter than him, but he explains that while she has to study for weeks to get a good grade, he aces every test without going through a single one of his notes. Hours later, they get back home and Mr. Supercomputer Brain quickly starts reading for the midterms. So Kara starts texting Minami out of boredom and gets surprised when she tells him that they are both studying as well. He then asks Mizuto if the midterms are really that important. And after Mizuto explains that it's the only test that puts him on edge, Kaguri freaks out and asks to join him. Later, he falls asleep. So Mizuto steps out for some fresh air and spots in one of her favorite pajamas. After he compliments it, she reminds him of the time they went on a school trip together and says that was probably when she first caught feelings for him. He then asks why she is bringing it up, but she claims it's just a memory she wanted to share with him. After classes the following Monday, Minami and two other girls ask Umaid to hang out, but she turns them down for a study session she has planned for the evening. Minami still tries to convince her since they haven't spent much time together since the sleepover, but the other girls tell her to stop, because Yumi has to fight to keep her spot at the top of the class. Hours later, she continues studying at home and thinks back to how her obsession with books began. It was after a midterm test years ago when she finally tasted defeat for the first time at the hands of Mizuto. For some reason, he was able to top the entire class in a subject that she loved. So she decided to get her revenge, and spent weeks without sleep just to reclaim her spot at the top. After managing to pull it off, she noticed that he barely gave her any attention and thought he didn't care at all about it until they met up in the library for the first time. After complimenting her choice in novels, and saying that it's probably why she easily scaled to the top, she realized that he was just doing a good job of acting nonchalant, and decided to keep dominating in every test. Shortly after the trip down memory lane, she heads out for coffee and spots him reading a book. So she asks if he has already accepted another defeat before the tests even start. The next moment he asks if being at the top is actually that nice and says he might consider taking the top spot. So she challenges him for it and claims there's nothing he can do to win. The next morning he notices that she barely got any sleep and asks if being at the top is that important to her. So she tells him not to bother trying to understand since he always acts like he is above everything. Later on, they write the first test, and as soon as school closes, she heads back home to grade herself, despite only missing 6 marks. She gets worried because it's one of Mizuto's favorite subjects. Just then, she hears his door and waits until he heads downstairs before sneaking in to find his test questions. Moments later, she storms down with it and demands to know why he didn't answer all the questions, but he refuses to answer. She then proceeds to go nuts and grabs him by the shirt while yelling about how she doesn't want his pity. So their mom grabs her and stops her from slapping his teeth out as she tries to calm Yumi down. Mizuto remembers that he has nuts and decides to stand up to her for refusing to accept his help when she was the one yapping about how important first place is to her. As he keeps yelling, her mom runs off to get his dad. But then starts crying and runs off to her room. She then spends the rest of the night studying and decides to focus on getting to first place no matter what. The next morning, Mizuto tells her to enjoy her last few days of being the top student because he has now decided to unleash his brain's full potential. They then spend the next few days geeking out on each test. And when the results finally come out, Ume rushes to the board to see if she reclaimed the title. Unfortunately, Mizuto successfully steals her spot and shows up right then to wish her luck on the next test before heading out. Just then, Minami shows up with the other girls, so Yume accepts that they will no longer enjoy being around her until they start talking like nothing happened. Upon realizing that they have always just wanted to be around her, she starts crying and thanks them for being supportive before running off to find Nudo. She then prepares herself to give him a huge hug followed by an apology for trying to clap him. But as soon as she enters the library, she sees him talking with a chick named Higa and hides. Mizuto then asks Higa for her definition of a friend, and after they go back and forth over it for a couple minutes, she makes him put on her socks so they can head home. Minutes later, they meet up with Ume and Minami, who then walks over to say hi to Higa. As the level 10 introvert hides behind Mizuto's back, he explains that she is extremely shy, so Minami asks if he has introduced her to Yume, and after he says no, Yumi runs off. Later that night, she decides to stop acting jealous since they are not even dating anymore. However, Mizuto notices a strange increase in her kindness throughout the following day and waits until after classes to tell Higa about it. After listening to every word, Higa tells him to trust his gut instead of just going with the flow all the time. This suddenly snaps a chord in Nudo's slow brain, so he thanks her for the advice and says she should always see him as someone she can be open to before heading home. Later that evening, Ume successfully convinces herself that being casual with Mizuto is the best thing she has ever done. If you loved this anime story and want to know what happens next, drop a comment below and I'll make part 2 just for you. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.